Today, I'm going to show you how to sew this very easy Lembas Laptop Sleeve pattern. This is a great project for a beginner. It's super quick and easy. You can go to sewliberated.com/laptop to download the pattern. And just to let you know, this laptop sleeve pattern is a free part of a larger pattern called the Elevenses Backpack, which is an amazing backpack pattern that comes with a course, and I will tell you more about that later. You are going to need the Lembas Laptop Sleeve instructions, which you will find linked below. It's a free pattern. In it, you will find the instructions and also the print at home and the A0 print at a print shop pattern pieces. So fabric, you're going to want to just use what you have lying around most likely. We recommend a quilting cotton or any light mid-weight fabric. This is actually a linen that I have. So these are going to be my main fabric pieces. You're going to want about half a yard of this main fabric color. It's the outside of the bag. This is quilt batting, and mine is just a cotton quilt batting. There are polyester. I always recommend using a natural fiber because it will biodegrade at the end of its life and there's less harm to the environment. So you're also going to need about 40 inches by 16 inches of this batting. In order to make the outer panels of the laptop sleeve, we're going to be taking the outer main fabric, sandwiching this batting between it, and then adding this backing fabric so it just becomes this little quilt sandwich. And your backing fabric, you are not going to see that. So you can use anything that you want. A scrap, a sheet. This is an old cotton sheet. The lining, which you will see, I am going to choose the same fabric that I used for the interior of my Elevenses backpack. The last little bit of fabric that you will need is a 3-inch by 2.5-inch scrap, and that is going to be the little pull at the end of the zipper. Let's now talk some notions. You are going to need a zipper, and you want a nylon coil zipper because you want to be able to trim it if necessary. If you're making a medium size, you're going to want a nylon coil zipper that is 15 to 16 inches long. For a large, 16 to 17 inches long. And if you are making a custom size, you're just going to need a zipper that's 1 inch longer than your intended laptop sleeve bag. Of course, you'll need something to cut your fabric with. A zipper foot is helpful. And these next little bits are going to be quilting specific. So this is a hair marker. I am going to use it to transfer the sun pattern from the pattern piece onto my quilted panel. This is a walking foot that can make it easier for your machine to pull this sort of quilt sandwich that we'll be making, pull that through and keep you from getting puckers and whatnot. So finally, some safety pins. Quilting safety pins have a little bend in them. They make it easier to get under all 3 layers. And finally, you will want to pick some thread for your quilted design. I have pre-cut my main fabric, my batting, and my backing fabric, so you didn't have to be bored to death. But I need to tell you about something very, very, very important. When you print out your pattern piece, you are going to see that there is a gray margin all around the pattern piece. Now, that is what you're going to use to cut out your main fabric, your backing, and your batting. That's because when we quilt this design, it tends to sort of shrink up. We're going to want to give ourselves some wiggle room. At the end of the quilting process, we're going to use this pattern piece again, and we're going to true up our sides. But for now, cut out your batting and your backing fabrics at the edge of that gray margin. And don't worry about transferring these notches yet. We're going to do that after we trim it up, post quilting. But for our lining fabric, what I want you to do is take your pattern piece and fold that gray margin back. The gray margin just gives you wiggle room for quilting, but you're going to use the pattern piece along those solid lines to cut out your lining pieces. And you're going to take this pattern piece, and I might try to get more of that cute design in here if I can. And then you're going to trim your lining to fit the pattern piece. And these are 2 layers here. All right, so you finish trimming up your lining pieces and I'll finish up mine. Okay, let's go ahead and make that quilt sandwich. Lay your backing fabric on the table, followed by your batting, and then your exterior, the main fabric, right on top there. I like to get some pattern weights. You can use soup cans or any sort of can you have around, anything that's heavy and not so huge that you can kind of work around it. I'm going to stack my pattern weights here, and my hand here, I don't really want it to shift that much, but I'm going to take my hair marker and press pretty hard, just following the lines, these dotted lines. And that will create a crease on my fabric sandwich. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer this entire design to my quilt sandwich, and you go ahead and do yours, and I'll meet you back here and then we'll get started with the actual quilting. So I'm going to be doing my quilted pattern with the Sunburst template, which is included in the free download for the Lembas Laptop Sleeve. However, you can do something more simple. You can do a 1" by 2" grid. We talk about that in the free pattern that you can read up on. However, the sky's really the limit when it comes to your quilting designs. And if you want to really geek out on creative quilting, I highly recommend you check out our Learn to Sew backpack course. And in it, we go over all sorts of fun details with an expert quilter, and you'll feel like you can tackle really any quilting design that your heart desires. I've transferred my Sunburst design to both the front and back, both the quilt sandwich stacks, and I'm ready to either hand-based or pin-based these layers together so that we can go ahead and sew them in the machine. I tend to like to leave about a hand width between my pins, so I'm just going to start in the middle, pin through all the layers, maybe give about a hand width here, and keep going until your layers are secure. I am going to change out my regular sewing foot for my walking foot. And the important thing to know when you are working on these quilted panels is that you are going to want to start your quilting in the center of the panel, actually on the outer ring of the Sunburst. That's really more or less at the center. I'm going to start with my circles first. I'm going to go in the same direction all the way around my circles. And when it comes time to quilt these rays, you want to make sure you're always starting at the circle and moving outward in that Sunburst pattern. You don't want to, you might think you could save time by quilting down one ray and then coming up at the bottom and quilting up the ray next to it, but that's going to really skew your fabric and create some unsightly puckers. Let's give it a go. You're going to want to make sure that your machine is set to about a 2.5 to 3 millimeter. If you're feeling nervous about the quilting, you can do a little just trial, get a little scrap, stack some batting, same fabric you're using, and just play around with how your machine feels with the quilting first. All right, so I've finished my Sunburst quilting, and always takes a little longer than you think, but I think the end result is very gratifying. And what you'll likely find, depending on how your machine deals with thread ends, is that you're going to have a bunch of thread ends that are going to be on top of your fabric that you're going to want to bring to the back. I've already done it on this panel, and really it's as simple as threading your needle and just pushing it through right next to where it came out and pulling it to the back. You can see how all these little threads are on the back of my panel. And you know, I'm not even going to worry about hiding them. They're going to be sandwiched between the lining and this backing fabric, and you won't even see them. So I'm just gonna leave them as is. Since I finished this one, I'm going to prep it for cutting again. And what I wanna do is give it a good steam. Okay, so we are all pressed, and you could, if you wanted to, you could dampen this, throw it in a dryer, and it would get that puckery, like even more puckery. I am just going to go with it as is. And before I put my pressing mat away, I am going to take the pattern piece, the template, and it got kind of wobbly, as you can see, during my hair marker pressing. So I am going to take the heat on my iron down and turn off my steam. And I'm just going to do a quick press like you might do to get some of the wrinkles out of a tissue paper pattern. Now I can take this pattern template, set it on top here. I'm making sure that my pattern is on the grain line, and I'm following the grain line of the fabric itself, not the edge. As you can see, my edge is not even here because of the quilting. That's fine. When I'm lining this up visually, I can see the grain lines on the fabric. It's the warp and the weft thread, what we're going at perpendicularly, and I can just line up the edge of my pattern with that and see that it's all set. I'm cutting through all the layers, and I'm going to do this for every side. And now go ahead and transfer your notches to this panel. And now you can repeat this process for the other panel, and then we're going to work with our zipper. If you've never done it before, take a breath. There's nothing to fear. We're just gonna go step by step. This is a really easy zipper installation. So you're gonna fold back the top edge about an inch. It's like this little wing here, and you're gonna secure this with a few stitches right here. You're gonna do the same on the other side. I have changed my presser foot to a zipper foot. All right, that was easy enough. Let's move on to the next step. We're going to be working on the long edge that has the notches marked. You're going to take your zipper and place it face down, so the zipper pull is face down on top of the right side of your quilted panel, and line it up with that notch. So the fold right where your zipper kind of takes a right angle, that's where you want to line up the notch with. So I'm just going to use my clips here, and I'm lining it up with the top edge. The edge of the zipper is lined up with the top edge of that quilted panel. We are going to need to mark where this notch is on the other side. I'm going to do that with a pin so I know that that's an important spot. I'm going to sew from this notch, right where the zipper bends, all the way down, and I'm going to stop once I get to this pin. You can see that when I use my zipper foot, and on my machine, I can move my needle all the way over to the edge. It just allows me to sew a little closer. Now, once you come to this zipper pull, you're going to see if you can wiggle it past. Mine is fine, and then you can keep on going. Here I am at this pin. I'm going to sew up to the pin, which is where the notch is. And then I'm going to backstitch a few times, lifting up my presser foot, and just gently bend this zipper out of the way and sew off of it. Now we get to sew the front lining piece to the front quilted panel. We're going to make a little zipper sandwich. So your quilted panel is facing right sides up. Your zipper, which you just sewed, is facing down towards that panel. And you're going to take your lining piece and you are going to put that right sides down. and line up the top edges. This can seem a little funny because your zipper is going to be sticking out on either end by design. Not to worry, it will all become clear shortly. The last time when we sewed the zipper to the front panel, we only sewed in between those two notches. This time, you're going to sew across the entire top. And while we're doing that, we're going to make sure that this piece that you sort of curved out of the way stays out of the way. You don't want it to flop around and get caught here. We want it to kind of guide it downwards and get a pin so it stays out of the way. All right, so same, gonna keep my zipper foot on and I'm going to sew along the seam. Okay, so we are sewing at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but since my needle is pushed over, it doesn't quite look like that. It looks like we're sewing at a 3/8 of an inch, but we're sewing correctly. You can see the distance from the needle to the edge of the fabric is 1/2 inch. All right, I'm at that point where I feel the zipper pull, so I'm just gonna shimmy it out of the way. Okay, here's the seam. Now you are going to attach the zipper to the back quilted panel and the back lining panel in the same way. And the steps are the same, but let's give a look because it can be a little confusing now that you have this extra stuff to work with. So we have our front panel. I'm kind of pulling the zipper out a little bit. We have the lining on one side. Same thing, but it's going to be mirrored. So you're going to take the zipper pull is going to be facing down. Your back quilted panel is facing up. You're going to put the zipper foot facing down on top of that back quilted panel. And same as before, where the zipper bends, that's where you're going to start sewing. That's where the notch goes. And you are going to clip or pin all the way down to the second notch on that back quilted panel. And then give yourself a good reminder that that's there. You're going to put a pin and sew all the way from this first notch all the way down to the second notch. Now, if you have a zipper foot like me, I need to go ahead and switch my needle to the opposite direction because I'm going to be sewing my zipper fabric on the other side of my presser foot now. Yeah, here we go again. We're at the zipper pull. I'm gonna reach inside here and shimmy that away, out of the way. So you are the boss of your fabric here. I am having to really be insistent on how this fabric is feeding through the feed dogs because there are so many layers. I'm making sure I'm feeling with my fingers, making sure that all of the layers are out of the way of this needle. Okay, now remember we are going to sew up to this second notch where that pin is. I'm going to backstitch, remove that pin, and then lift up my presser foot, bend this out of the way, just like I did before. And now we need to attach the back lining to this back piece. All right, so you have these two front panels. You're gonna flip that over, so front panels are facing down. So when you attach the back lining to the back panel, it's actually going to look like your lining pieces are right sides together. Lay that down and then lift up at the zipper. And you can see here is your wrong side of the back lining and wrong side of the back. So everything else is sandwiched between here. Clip at the top here or pin. And you're gonna do the same thing that you did before. You're gonna sew all the way across the top edge. without worrying about those notches. However, you're going to be aware of this long zipper that's hanging off. And just like you did before, you are going to pin that out of the way. All right, so this is pinned out of the way. I might remove this pin and just hold this down with my fingers because that's the direction I'm going to be sewing in. But if I open this up, you'll see underneath here is that lining piece. So if you feel like this lining might get in the way, this front lining, you could pin it down. So I'm moving my needle to the other side again. All right, so here's that seam. You now have a fancy assembly. I am going to wing it a little bit in doing my zipper end tab. You kind of have to decide, depending on how much leftover zipper length you have here, how long you want yours to stick off. Now, so I'm just going to go ahead and trim mine. I'm taking off the zipper stop just to make it a little easier to sew. Plus, I just don't want it that long. And now I'm going to put my zipper end. I'm going to sew this with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And as you can see, I have my lining facing up as I'm doing this. That is so I can sew top stitch from the right side of this zipper end. I have switched out my zipper foot back to a regular presser foot. Pressing that. Then folding these ends under. Folding the short top end over 1/2 inch. And once again. So all I need to do now is go and top stitch along the edge. This is about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, all around this little zipper end. Okay, so here's the cute little zipper end piece. This is the Homestretch, y'all. We are going to sew everything together. Rearrange your assembly so that the right sides of the quilted panels are together and also the right sides of your lining pieces. Go ahead and tuck in this zipper. We do not want to sew that into the seam. Again, this is a situation where you could pin it out of the way. I might use a safety pin and not a regular straight pin. I'm also, as I'm doing this, I'm going to make sure that my zipper pull is kind of towards the middle. Clip or pin all the way around the end. And these seam allowances, as you're pinning them on the side, the seam allowances, you want them to face down toward your lining pieces, not up towards the quilted pieces, because that would make it super bulky. We want to reduce that bulk by making sure that we are pinning and sewing those seam allowances so they face down toward the lining. Okay, here we are all pinned. I am going to switch to my walking foot so my machine can handle all of these layers. So you are going to sew all the way around, but you're going to leave a space, a gap on the bottom lining so that you can turn this whole piece right side out at the end. Now remember that we're at 1/2 inch seam allowances, and you are going to want to be the boss of that fabric when you come up against these seam allowances at where the zipper is. And I'm lifting this up and kind of making sure that this bottom seam allowance is still facing down towards the lining. It'll have a tendency to want to fold back up because that's the direction that the fabric is pushing, but fold it down towards this lining. Okay, moment of truth. Let's reach in and see if this turns into a laptop sleeve. Okay, it's a laptop sleeve. And now all we have to do is close up this opening where we turn the bag right side out. So I'm just going to fold these unfinished edges in, press, and take them to the sewing machine for a quick seam. You can also hand stitch this. Tuck this lining inside. Really kind of use my fingers to get everything in the right spot in these corners to move those seam allowances into place. Okay, now you can see it's a legit laptop sleeve. So the last thing we need to do is going to really help with the ease of your zipper pulling and opening and closing. So as is right now, you can tell that this lining kind of bubbles up and it can make it difficult to pull the zipper closed and open. So what we just need to do is sew a line of stitching along the top edge here. And while you do that, you're going to really you don't necessarily need to iron it. You want to make sure that the fabric of the lining isn't pushing up towards your zipper. You want to kind of use your fingers to work that down. Make sure everything is nice and taut. And then from the outside, we're just going to sew a line of stitching all the way around. And that's going to secure all of those layers in place and make your zipper pull easy to maneuver. Now I'm using my walking foot here so that it's easier to get all of these layers through over my feed dogs. If you don't have your walking foot, just know that you might have to kind of be bossy with the fabric here a little bit. And even with my walking foot, I have to be a little bossy. And here you have it, a completed laptop sleeve. Let's see if it works. So remember, you can head to sewliberated.com/laptop to download the Lembas Laptop Sleeve instructions, which includes the pattern piece template and the template for doing this sunburst pattern. If you are itching to get more into bag making, we have a course called Learn to Sew a Backpack, which you will take some of these skills that you learned in this little video today and transfer them to the most amazing heirloom backpack you can imagine. You learn how to do a different kind of a zipper install, working with hardware, even thicker fabrics. We go through hand quilting. You learn how to do this amazing soft tooth star. We go through quilt as you go method for this roll top portion. You will not only be an amazing bag maker at the end of this course, you will also be an amazing quilter. All of the skills that we learn can be transferred. So the backpack itself is super comfortable and really is a canvas for your own creativity. Again, the course is called Learn to Sew a Backpack, which is part of our Learn to Sew Your Clothes course series. The link is down below, and I hope to see you in class.